So, a little bit about myself. I met Bill just a few weeks ago at a men's camp, and he heard a little bit about my journey. I've known his brother for a long time, so I guess he knows bits and pieces. And so he said, oh, please come along and talk about what you do in life. The journey really starts with this book. So this is a book I wrote for my patients. I was a physiotherapist for a long time, and they often had questions. Very common questions. You know, everybody knows that the Bible, the New Testament, when it was first written down, it had to be copied by hand. If somebody else wanted a copy to read it at the same time. And then as those copies got old and worn out, somebody else had to make a copy of that copy. So you got copies of copies of copies. And many people just assume that that was a process where there's lots and lots of mistakes. So I wanted to write something that was explain the situation and show people the evidence for themselves so they can see what's been changed, what's not been changed, whether it was intentional or accidental, and most importantly, did any of it change the meaning of what Jesus said? Does any of it change anything significantly about who Jesus is? And so that was a big piece of the book, is actually showing people why you can be 100% confident that when you're reading your New Testament, you really are reading what Jesus said, and you really are reading about what he did. So that's the upshot of that. I didn't know exactly where it was going to come out. I hoped it would come out that way, but that's definitely the case. The first section is a more fundamental question. I remember when I first became a Christian, my mates at school, it was a government school, they said to me, John, what do you mean you become a Christian? They said, you don't really believe Jesus said all that stuff. No one could read or write back then, John. They're all illiterate shepherds. You're crazy. So the more fundamental question was, who could read and write back then? Was it only the privilege of a few wealthy people? Or were there people from every strata of society that could read and write? Maybe not to the same high percentage as what we have, but were there poor people that could read and write? Were there rich people? And of course, if any of you have been to a lecture where you had to, where you knew you were going to be examined afterwards, you wanted to take notes. And so did they have a culture of taking notes when they listened to someone speak? In that case, was there shorthand? Was there an ability to have a skill where you could write really quickly because you used a slightly different writing style, very different actually? And so the answer is yes. And then of course, a very common question people would ask, and once again, these people are aggressive. Many Christians have these questions, sometimes unanswered still. Many people say, well, who wrote it? Well, people who follow Jesus. So they loved him. Oh yeah, they loved him with a passion, they died for him. And what do they immediately say back? Well, they were biased. So if they were biased, you can't believe anything they wrote. And so then I talk about, well, how can you identify bias? How do you know when bias is twisting the truth, and how do you know when it's not? And did anybody else write something from a totally different perspective, from a totally different bias? So that's the three big sections of the book in a nutshell. And I wrote it for people who don't necessarily know Jesus. I wrote it for people who don't know Greek or Hebrew language. But I wrote it that it's heavily referenced, and it's a journey of discovery. It's not just a whole lot of bullet points or what we call a polemic. It's literally it's my journey of discovery going through these logical questions in sequence. And it's because of that book that I ended up in Ukraine. So that's why I'm talking a bit about the book tonight. And the book is for sale here if you want it. You can get it at bookshops as well. But some people came my way and they said, John, you need to go to Russia and your book should be in Russian because people in Russia would love your book. I was really surprised. And then years went past, and then there was another Russian person sitting on my lounge chair and learned about my book and said, John, this should be in Russian. Same words. Different generations, different ethnic backgrounds, but both Russian nationality. And I thought, oh, well, maybe there's something in this. And in the background, there'd always been a guy saying, John, you need to go to Russia with me to do what you teach about in the churches there. And so when one of them did ask me to go there and teach, I said, surely there's somebody else in the Northern Hemisphere. It's a mighty long way to go. And they said, oh, we don't really like Americans, so they're a bit racist. There's not many Christians left in England, I guess, so the next port of call is me. And they said, oh, you're a bit different. So I went there to teach, and I went there to see whether there was any publishers in Russia that thought that the book should be in Russian. And I met 4 of them that did. And so then it became a book in Russian. So that was exciting. I never expected that. That was really great. And then about that time it ended up in Arabic language, published in Egypt. So that was a really interesting story as well. I never expected that one. But when it came out in Russia, in Russian language, I immediately felt this urge that there should be some copies going to Ukraine. And I can't give you a logical reason why I had that urge. There's no Ukrainian blood in me. I knew very little about it at the time. Maybe in my primary school years I thought of Cossacks and Ukraine, maybe there was that. But there's this really strong urge, you've got to get some copies into Ukraine. And in Ukraine there are a lot of people who can speak and read Russian. And so I said to the publishing house in St. Petersburg, can you do this? Can you make this happen? And 3 months later they said, oh, we tried and we couldn't. And I thought, that's not good enough. I said, look, I will pay for them to go all the way from St. Petersburg into Ukraine. I'll look after all the freight. You just got to get them there. Another 3 months passed, and they said, we've tried all the normal private courier companies. You cannot get your book into Ukraine. And of course, this was 2018. Russia had already invaded and taken a massive big hunk of Ukraine in 2014. But I thought that war had stopped. I didn't realise that the Russian front, the new front line, was a continual war zone. It was just low key. It never stopped. And that animosity is what was causing problems with people in Russia doing business in Russia, not wanting to seem to be helping the enemy, the people that are stopping Russia owning all the rest of the world. So anyway, through devious means it got to Moldova, and then I said to the guy in Moldova, can you get it to Ukraine? And he said he could, because Russia and Moldova had a little bit more peace between them. And then I wanted to know, well, who are these people in Ukraine that have got my book? And so I rang them up, and of course with internet the way it is, and video conferencing and COVID, we then developed a friendship. And that was a really, really deep friendship that happened quite quickly. They were a young family, they were a pastor of a young church. And then as time went by, the big February 22nd invasion of Russia, so the second big phase of the war happened, where Russia suddenly poured a lot of troops over the border and full-on, full-scale war. So a lot of the women and the children are leaving. So this is a bit of an unusual refugee situation. A lot of modern refugee situations, especially around the Middle East, when you look at the crowds, they're mostly men. But this was all women and children, because the men weren't allowed to leave. They were meant to be fighting for their country, fighting for their livelihoods. And so this family I knew got split. So she's suddenly going to another country with 1.2, 1.5 million other people, big rush across the border. She can't take her husband with her, and she's 2 weeks before she's due to have a baby. She has a baby over there. And I ring her up. It actually wasn't 2 weeks, it was only maybe 5 days, it seemed to me. And I got to talk to her shortly after her baby was born, while she's in this other country. And I was saying, you know, it's because this family, the woman, the wife could speak great English. And I said to her, you know, I'm really sorry, sad about what's happening. And I said, we're praying about it. And then she said something. She said, oh, John, I'm just praying for all the young boys. I was thinking, what young boys? I actually asked her. I couldn't think of what young boys. Maybe she meant the young men in Ukraine that are about to go across, but she wasn't that old. She said, all the Russian young boys. So many of their soldiers are just young boys. I'm praying for them. I was thinking, what other young mum would be praying for the soldiers that have kicked her out of the country, separated her from her husband, and for all she knows, the whole country will be taken over within days. And it really was like that. The expectation in Ukraine, and the expectation in Moldova, was this would be all over in a couple of weeks. The Russians were so certain about that. Many of them, they wore dress uniforms, full dress uniforms underneath their battle fatigues, because they thought it'd only be 2 or 3 days and be able to rip off their dirty clothes and they'd be able to march victorious through the streets. And they did take, of course, a lot of Ukraine, but then thankfully over the months, Ukraine's fought back and they got some of their territory back. None of the original stuff that was taken in 2014. So my wife and I got this friendship going, and then they asked us to come and help. And we very much believe that if someone asks you to help, and it looks like you could probably help, you need a really good reason not to go. My wife thinks a war is a really good reason not to go. She was quite afraid. But we felt that this is where God wanted us to go. And so we went there for 2 months last year. And so I'll take you a little bit on a journey now through these PowerPoints. What I want you to see is really how do Christians live in the middle of the night, 24 hours a day, day in, day out for 3.5 years. Because it is night time like that for them. It's a really dark time in their lives. So I want to instill in you this ability to see, well, this is how Christian communities can live and even thrive when it's always the night. We can talk about geopolitics later on during question and answer, but I most want to talk about Jesus, and so we'll go through a bit of the story, okay? So this is my wonderful wife, Dr. Clerke. We go with backpacks for a variety of reasons. For a start, it's really quick. Compared to a car, one of my friends took 14 hours to leave Ukraine in a car. Usually it takes 4 or 6 hours, so we walk across, that's the no man's land, hence all the barbed wire fence. There's about 250 metres between the Polish border and the Ukrainian border. There's that no man's land, if you like. So that's us walking in through there. She's a PhD doctor, biomedical sciences, so she's all about hand injuries. And there's a lot of hand injuries there. The skill set of Ukrainians is very, very behind, and they've got massive numbers of patients. They are at extreme end of damage, and they really are struggling. So that's Anita. This is a bit of a map for those of you who might not be sure where Ukraine is. Ukraine's a little purple patch there. The rest of all that red stuff is Russia. So Russia is about 29 times bigger than Ukraine, and Ukraine's managed to keep Russia away from every square inch of its country for 3.5 years now. So it's pretty amazing. Sort of a David and Goliath story, really. This is the Ukrainian border. You can sort of see like this. So that's the west, where it's relatively safe. Big city, Lviv, not far from the Polish border. And then over here, this is where all the front line is now. Crimea was taken back in 2014. This is a frontline city. And Kherson is another frontline city. Where's Kherson? Kherson's actually about here. So these circles just simply represent where we went. But we don't always stay together. Some people say, what sort of a husband are you? You bring your wife to a war-torn country and then you split. We were there this year for a full month, and for over 2 weeks. She was way in the west, which is a bit safer, and I was way in the east. There's 2 reasons for that. The east is certainly quite dangerous, and the west is where she's really needed. We go where we're needed, where we're invited, so that means that someone's got to be willing to admit we need help. Not every person that works in every hospital admits they need help. So where we go depends on their ability to say we need a world expert and we want them for free. And so we go there for free. And it's our way of showing love for them from Jesus. You know, people invariably ask you, why are you here? And because no one else is here. So, and then when they find out that you're not with WHO or somebody like that, you know, I've only met one WHO person. And they're usually there just for a week and then they go again. When they find out that we're doing this because we love them, and because we love them only because of Jesus, I'm not naturally loving, then it has a big deal. So that's why sometimes Anita's in Lviv, or we're both in different places. Kremenchuk is where you'll see a little bit of stuff where I was this year, and so we'll move on. So just get you orientated once again, relatively safe. Russia's swarming across from here. When they came in early 2022, they came in from the north. Chernobyl, some of you would have heard the Chernobyl nuclear plant. It's sort of between Kiev and the Belarusian border. So Belarus allowed huge numbers of Russians to pour through their borders in 2022. But they're not a puppet state. What do you do when you're there? You get an app. Everywhere you go, you get an app. This is an air raid alert app. So it goes off every time that there's an air raid alert. So when we were there for the first time, this thing would go off 5 or 6 times a day, and you're meant to go in your bunker. This is Poland. Don't know who the old man is. Basically crossing the border. Nita, we were there for 2 months in the beginning. She had half a day of tourism. So this is her half day out of the 2 months when she got to look around with a beautifully wonderful helper, Ukrainian helper, who's now a doctor. This normally would be full of people. So she was almost crying because normally this would be full of tourists. There's no one there now. There's no queues, there's nothing. We travel by trains. Sometimes they're very Russian, Soviet style, sometimes they're a bit new. Often we're having to travel overnight. Now this is a bomb shelter. If it looks like a car park, it's because it is. So bomb shelters, if there is one, is typically just a car park. There's no toilets there, there's no chairs there, there's no showers there. You're told as soon as you cross the border, there's 3 things you need to have with you all the time. Your mobile phone, your battery pack for your mobile phone, because you could be in there a long, long time, and water, and something to sit on, because it's just concrete. And you could be there for a very, very long time. But no one goes. No one goes because it's too full on. So you can imagine at night, 3 times the air raid alarms go off, and I might play that if we get time later on. It's just that classic World War II sound you've heard, that and it just goes on and on. And but you imagine living there. Can you get up out of bed 3 times? And of course one air raid alarm may still not have been finished. In other words, you've not heard the clearance alarm before the next one starts up again. Because the Russians don't just send a volley of missiles over once in the night. They send them throughout the night. So the noise just continues, and everyone's tired, and no one goes to the bomb shelter, unless the building beside you. Now everywhere you go, you see the war, signs of war. So you can see this guy's got his forearm and his arm, and he's got bits of metal sticking into him from this triangular metal frame that sits on the outside, and there to hold all these bits of bone in place. So you can see a lot of that just where we are. That was at the church. Ukraine, this is in Kiev. They have big, beautiful shopping centres, just like we do. Not all of them have been bombed yet. So it's just how luxurious, just like I guess a Chermside shopping centre is. They have the same sort of deal. In Poland, I would be like every other bloke looking for a man seat. Somewhere to sit while my wife would go shopping. In Poland, you cannot find space on a man seat. In these shopping centres, they're just women. You rarely see men. You go in peak hour time, huge numbers of women, not so many men. Many of them are dead or fighting or whatever. There's plenty of food there still, but the prices have gone up a lot. Electricity is really expensive compared to before. Obviously, when huge amounts of the population move from the east to the west, some of them keep going. So there's about 3.5 million refugees at any one point in time. Their population is only was about 39 million. So at any one point in time, there's at least 3.5 million of them living overseas. There's about another 3 million or so, actually very close to 4 million, that aren't living in their own homes anymore. So they're internally displaced. They're still in the same country, but they're not in the same city. About 80% of those have been internally displaced for well over a year. and roughly, I think it's about 60% have been displaced more than once. This is what the app looks like on your phone, so it goes off, and you think, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to go down to the bomb raid shelter? So you look at it, it tells you, okay, this is dark red, so that's particularly bad. This is what's been launched. You can find out how many MiG jet bombers have been launched, or how many cruise missiles or whatever are coming your way. This lets you know that there's some action happening at the front line. And then as that wave of bombers and missiles settles down, it changes colour back into a softer colour. So that sort of gives you some way of making your own assessment. I would look out the window, and if I could still see people walking to the bus stop, I thought, okay, I can do that too. I can just stay and keep working here. But the one night when we were in Kiev, it was bucketing rain. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. It was our first week there. Air raid alarms going off in our room, and on the street, and on the app, and there's thunder and lightning. And I've got no idea now, is that thunder, or is that something blowing up? And I can't look down the street. So we did go down that night and joined a few other people. Some of it's very beautiful. This actually is a hospital where Anita worked. You think you may be looking at Switzerland or something. And once upon a time when the USSR was around, that was when this place was built. And it's probably built mostly for the Communist Party officials. But it's well and truly full now of people needing to be patched up. My wife teaches surgeons, junior surgeons, and hand injury therapists. Hand injury therapists are either physios or occupational therapists who then specialise, and in the West that takes 2 years. Just like an orthopaedic surgeon who wants to be a hand surgeon, he or she then has to spend another year to become a hand surgeon. The hands are really complex. And so we would take a lot of this stuff over in our backpacks. This last time we went, we took over suture material. One of the surgeons we knew he could get rough suture material, but he couldn't get the fine stuff. I thought, that's just so tragic. It really is when you think that you're in a major hospital and you can't get the right suture material. We even brought over a headlamp so he could actually see what he was doing. And then I would also sometimes, you're probably wondering what I do there. In the first trip I was her gopher, so my wife is a bit like, who's the guy that makes stuff out of everything?
MacGyver.
MacGyver. My wife's like a MacGyver. But even MacGyver needs the stuff. So she'd give me the shopping list of things, and I would scour veterinary shops, dental supply shops, equivalent of Bunnings, and try to get anything vaguely close. And so that's what they do. So this here is a typical street. This is in a fairly big town. I counted them. These are all the people that have died from that area. So there was 425 of those when we were there last year. They've got so many dead soldiers to honour now. They now put 4 on each frame because there's just not enough space. Because, 425. Imagine Queen Street with 425 of these. And what's fascinating is people get used to this, just like you get used to wearing your watch. People get used to this. They walk past and they're licking their ice block and enjoying the sunshine. And we're just going there looking at all the young men or young women or whatever. So there's signs of war everywhere. This is a cemetery in Lviv, and it's just for soldiers from Lviv that have died in the war, and they keep having to expand and expand and expand to make more room for all the soldiers that are dead just from that city. Now this is interesting. This is 9 o'clock in the morning, so it's traffic time, and you can see these 2 people. They've got out of their car in the middle of the road, and so has everybody else. At 9 o'clock, everybody stops, wherever you are, and you just spend a minute's silence. So you want to know what it's like living in a country at war, then that's part of what it looks like too. And then after everyone stops. We have to flick through these. I'll give you Anita's talk. Of course, Anita couldn't be here because we've got short notice for going back in October. So we've both got bucket loads of work to prepare. And so she just could not squeeze in tonight, as well as all the preparation for going back. One of the universities want her to have an accredited course because they like so much of what she does that they want to roll it out nationally, and so she ups the ante. So this is a person that's all they've got on their hand. You can see, okay, they've just got one thumb. The other hand's totally missing, by the way. So you don't see that here. This one here is a burnt hand, and now it's been scarred. And what's happening is the scar grows. So already you can only do this a little bit, but soon you won't even be able to move them in or out because they just don't know how to treat things properly. And so this is my wife's world, teaching them how do you deal with that. And of course a lot of people with injured hands, they don't have any legs anymore. So whatever you can get for them out of their hand means a lot. They're trying to change how people perceive someone with an artificial leg. So what a lot of the soldiers have done, just this calendar year as far as I know, they put soft toys on their artificial legs and their artificial limbs because kids are going to stare. And they didn't want the kids to stare and be afraid. So they put these little, this is a capybara, if you're from South America, it's just a big rodent, and all these little soft toys just to help the kids not be afraid of them, you know. So it's a really nice touch. My wife's going back this year to work at one particular place called Superhumans. They're superhumans because they might have 2 artificial legs and an artificial arm, and they build on that. These are not people that you should think go on the rubbish heap. These are people that have got a lot to contribute. That's them learning out how to make splints. Sometimes it looks like, well, there's not much wrong with that hand apart from its missing bits. But this finger, because it wasn't treated properly, is sticking like that. And the other hand's had a stroke. So when he goes to pick something up, the finger's always in the way. So even though it looks like a relatively minor thing to have your finger stuck up, if that's your only hand, it's a real big deal. So you should teach them about, well, how do you get it straight? We have to move on. Sometimes you talk to big groups, small groups, and we really have to move on. Oh, this guy's interesting. So this here, this is a toe that's been stuck onto a hand. So if you've got a few fingers but you don't have your thumb, it's really tough. And they're just starting this sort of advanced surgery where they take a bit of toe off the guy's foot and they're sticking it on the remnant of a thumb bone way down here. And that's this guy here. And if we had time, what he's doing is he's pumping his hand up and down after surgery to try and help it heal. This eyeball's missing and he doesn't have the other arm. So this is what war looks like. It's very sad.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a nice way for your home. Thank you.
I get very teary when there's just some sign of love. All my wife gave her was a little cheap kangaroo pin. She was crying. You know? Really, really lovely people. Very easy to get along with. And that's my wife's talk. So we'll move on now to my talk. Good idea to write down any questions that you might have, and just let me pick this up. And how about maybe some of you have a question about what my wife does? Yes, please.
What's the most common cause of like lost hands?
Sure, yeah, the usual blast wounds. So last night, well, one night ago in Ukraine, 805 drones were sent by Russia. 14 missiles were sent. Many times there's about 400 to 500 troop invasions across the border, and they can drop over 1,100 glide bombs, all in the one night. Yeah. So it's quite a busy war. They talk about noisy nights. Did you have a noisy night? Ring up somebody. And so that's just like, you know, we have euphemisms, you know, did you kick the bucket? They say, oh, it was a noisy night. Yeah. So good question. So a lot of it's blast injuries and soldiers. They call them defenders, they don't call them soldiers. They're just trying to defend the country. Anybody else?
We're very interested in the work of the leprosy mission and the work that they do with nerves and so forth. Any correlation?
Yeah, you're an interesting story. So there was a bricklayer in England a long time ago, and God wanted him to do more. So he became really what they call now the grandfather of hand surgery. He wanted to do more, so he went to help with the people with leprosy, and he was the first person to talk about or to do surgery that involved putting bits of you that still work into places where the leprosy has stopped that other bit working. So leprosy basically stops nerves talking to their target, which might be a patch of skin or might be a muscle. So he was all about, well, hang on, there's this other muscle that you don't need so much. Maybe we can take it and put it up there and you can still move your thumb. You might have lost some other movement because we took something. We took the rob Peter to pay Paul. So that guy, Brand, he's a grandfather. So he's still acknowledged now. So the leprosy mission, probably not many hand surgeons now would know, their grandfather, they know his name, but they don't realise, well, he did all that because he was working with leprosy, and he did that because he loved Jesus, and he was just a bricklayer to start with. So, great story. This is just a map to help you once again get orientated. You can see little Ukraine here. Some of you are from the Philippines, way over here, and this massive country called Russia.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What sort of distance are we talking about? Are we talking about thousands of kilometres wide?
Okay.
How high?
Yeah, so when I wanted to go back from the east to see Anita and Lviv, it was an overnight train trip and 3/4, almost 2 overnight trips by train. So a long way. But I did stop in the daytime. So probably looking at about 2,000 kilometres, I would say, from east to west. That's a rough guess. The trains are interesting. It's the black of night, and your app's going off telling you there's an alarm in your area, because you can tell the app which area you're in, and then it goes off and you think, well, I'm in a train, can't do anything. And then the train stops, and you think, oh, we're in the middle of a paddock. Do you really have to stop? Usually much harder to hit a moving target. So usually you never find out why the train stopped for an hour before you keep going. But it is a bit unnerving. We'll talk about that later. I'll just see where this is all at. I can see that. Excuse me for a minute. I'll just put this down. Okay, so are you all understanding what I'm saying? Getting able to hear okay? Okay. So this is our first time in Ukraine. We typically didn't get met by anybody. It wasn't until Nita would turn up at a hospital at the front door, so we would try and find hotels and move around. So this is just outside the front of our hotel. This is only 8.5 kilometres from the middle of the CBD of Kiev. So Kiev's their capital city, both in terms of politics and business. It's like a combination of Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney, if you like, without anything bad from Canberra. And so the Russian tanks got within 8.5 kilometres of the smack in the middle of Kiev during the February 2022 invasion. And this is, some of you have watched World War II movies, these are things to stop tanks. And then this is a billboard. You'd see these billboards. That's a billboard trying to encourage you to join a particular battalion. And if you join that battalion, you think you're going to be using a chainsaw, you're going to be driving big, fast trucks, you're going to be doing some welding, and you think, oh, well, that sounds better than being in a trench. I can join that and I'll probably end up there. And so instead of being pulled off the street, because that's what happens, usually there'd be 3 policemen with machine guns and 2 or 3 army guys, and they go around the street and they stop you and they say, why are you here? And that's usually it. If you don't have any good reason, you don't get to go home. You go with them. And then you go with them to a recruiting centre. You usually get to make 1 phone call then, and then you go to training. Training is sometimes 12 weeks, and then you're at the front line. So So men hide sometimes, which is very dysfunctional, creates a whole world of problems. Yeah. But a lot of men volunteered, especially early days. So yeah, it's a bit different when you're used to seeing billboards here. You see some really old stuff. This is a little bit of the city of Kiev. You can see it's quite big. So although there's bombs going off, the chance of your little patch of dirt, your apartment building being hit is a bit minimised because there's hundreds and hundreds of other apartment buildings they might have chosen to hit that night. I want to explain about why there's so much concern from Ukrainians about being occupied by Russians. Some people don't know much about World War II history. They don't know much about history at all, and that's fine, it's not their fault. So I'll just go through some things. The Ukrainians are certain if they don't die fighting, they will die anyhow. That'll be the end of them. So a young woman like Rhapsody here, she knows that if she doesn't help her man, then that's the end of it. You know, she will fight, she'll pick up a gun. There's no point thinking she can have a normal life there, especially if she's a Christian, and especially if she's a Protestant Christian, or especially if she wants to speak Ukrainian, or especially if she wants to have children and they grow up with an understanding of what Ukraine was and that it even existed, etc., etc. So this is from the Holodomor. Put your hand up if you've heard of the Holodomor. Yeah, 1, 2, yeah. So most of us have heard of the Holocaust. Well, the Holodomor is what happened in Ukraine. So in the space of 1 year, Russia, which was the controller of the USSR, instigated a deliberate starvation campaign, and the minimum statistic is 3.7 million Ukrainians were starved to death, just in 1932 to 1933. So some of you will think, well gee, my grandmother was a little girl then. And so a lot of them are remembering, well gee, that actually wasn't that long ago, and now the same nationality, the same nation, Russia, is coming again. It was only my grandmother's generation that they killed 3.7 million of us because they didn't like the word Ukraine. It's not meant to be something that exists. So this is a very famous statue. It depicted a little girl trying to get some grain. Old technology, new technology, straw broom versus plastic broom. This is outside one of the Holodomor museums. They were still growing grain there, but the grain was out of bounds. So if you like, all the grain fields were like locked up. But they weren't locked up physically, they were locked up because they would routinely raid people's homes to make sure they had absolutely no way of cooking it or grinding it, and that they didn't hide any. So there were gangs and gangs of gangs going round and round and round, always looking, you know, maybe Rhapsody may have even had a daughter by then. Maybe she'd had a few grains, or where'd you get those grains from? Well, it fell off a truck. In one case, a little girl, about 8 years old, she found some grain on the road, but she was punished because the grain had fallen off a government truck, so she was stealing from the government. So that was the era that a lot of the Ukrainians grew up in. And so that's why they're not in any doubt about what the future would look like. These are mass graves. And this rings bells for them now, because when Russia came in February 2022, what did they start seeing? Photos of mass graves. So it's a reminder, oh, this is all coming back. What did Russia do? It started bombing their ports. It's cutting off all the electricity. It's blowing up dams, it's blowing up electricity generating places. That's just dead children on the street. This is from the Holodomor. And so they're just people would be dying on the street and other people walking by. But there are churches there. And so this is a church. It looks perhaps like a modern church. What makes a good church?
Music.
Music. There's even something more important now. If you walk into the church and the first thing you see is a diesel generator, you know it's a good church. Because then they can keep playing the music when the power goes out. So last year there was lots and lots of power outages. Basically in a big city, 4 hours off as a minimum in a block, sometimes 5.5, and 4 hours on, supposedly. And so there's diesel generators everywhere, and different parts of the different blocks would have their power. So we were in there, power suddenly went off, and the singers didn't miss a beat. They just kept singing, and then within about, I reckon, less than 90 seconds, the diesel generator was up, and the lights were on. So yeah, that's life. I teach in Bible seminaries, we might come back to that. And I know I'm running out of time. I'm wondering what I'm doing here. I'm teaching about anxiety and PTSD, moral injury, forgiving your enemies, loving your enemies. So these are challenging messages. I'm told I'm the only one there teaching them about how do you love people who are crossing your borders and raping your daughters and blowing up your children's hospitals. What does that look like? How does anyone forgive someone who's done a heinous crime? You know, if you've been tortured or raped, how do you go about forgiving? You know, Jesus used the present tense. He said, forgive your enemies, love your enemies. He didn't say love those that used to be your enemy. I think a lot of people put some past tense verbs in there, but he says, love your enemies, pray for your persecutors. It's all present tense. And interestingly enough, this is something that's digestible. So what I'm saying is with God's Holy Spirit, I'm amazed that 99% of people with God's Holy Spirit can see that there's a way that they can move forward. Hate is a very destructive thing. And when you think about it, it's 3.5 years. At a recent ceasefire talks, well not recent, back in June, the lead Russian negotiator sat down in front of the lead Ukrainian negotiator, and the Russian said, how long can you fight this war for? We fought Sweden for 21 years. Think you can keep this up for 7 years? 11 years? 13? Of course the answer is no. So there's not going to be a ceasefire, but the war could go for a long time. So if you think, well, it's okay for me to hate because, you know, it's just a flash in the pan. No, you're going to be hating for years and years and years. And that's not what Jesus wants us to do. That's not the way to live your life. You know, when I grew up reading the Bible about love your enemies, well, who was my enemy? Well, it was a guy that threw some rocks at me or hit me or punched me up or something. But there's nothing like this. Most of the time it's insults, it's adults, it's mostly someone slighted you or made you feel like an imbecile. But in this country, loving your enemies is just like it was back then. When Jesus was telling people to love their enemies, who were their enemies? Well, they're under occupation, if I remember rightly. They weren't Russians, they were Romans. And they were doing genocide, mass enslavement, mass torture, urban annihilation. That's what the Romans did. So, and here's an interesting thing. You know how the Christian communities wrote letters to each other after the apostles died, the first 12 disciples died. And we've got some of these letters. We call them the church fathers. You know what the most common Bible verse was? It wasn't John 3:16. It was love your enemies, pray for your persecutors. That's the most popular verse in the surviving manuscripts. So isn't that fascinating? So I talk a lot about these mental health conditions, what they are. Some people think they're from Satan. Some people think that Christians should never be anxious about anything. Some Christians are pacifists. They don't believe you should resist at all. Other Christians, they call them militarists. They believe you should actually try to stop the Russians invading. So it's just like any Christian group of communities. There's different viewpoints. But they need a lot of help in basic understanding about, well, what's the difference between hate and anger? We're told not to hate, but certainly we're told that don't let your anger last beyond the sun going down. Does that mean there's some anger that's okay to have for 12 hours? Jesus got angry. So these are the things I talk about. And then especially this big process. They don't have a whole cupboard full of stories of people forgiving anybody for anything. The guy in the blue shirt there, if you heard a preacher and he started to preach about someone who forgave somebody in terrible circumstances, what name would pop into your head? A woman.
Corey.
Yeah, Corrie ten Boom. If I hear another preacher mention Corrie ten Boom as the example of forgiving your enemy, I'd be so disappointed, because there's lots of Corrie ten Booms, you know. The problem with always using stories from the 1940s is people don't think anybody else has done it since the 1940s. And in Ukraine, they've not even heard of Corrie ten Boom. So this is, they've come from a Soviet background. They only got free of the USSR in '91. They're quite a new country. And so I've written a book now for them. And it's called Hating and Forgiving, Violent Crime and Combat Killing. It's because when I gave these talks, and still give these talks in Ukraine, they wanted something in writing. So 150,000 words later, it's going through the second phase of editing now. I got my first endorsement today from a guy who used to be a paratrooper and then became a theologian. So that was very exciting news today. And there's a Ukrainian publisher who's very keen to publish it. And later on I'll put up a QR code so that if you want to, you can donate to help that process of getting the book from English into Ukrainian going. This book, when it was turned into Ukrainian, it was all Ukrainian money. But things are getting harder. You know, when we were there last year, if there was 300 or 270 drains in a night, we thought that was a really noisy night. But now 700s, then 800s, maybe a night with only 600s, it's very full, very noisy. So Keith, you're a pastor. Okay, this could be you and your wife, just 5 years ago. And your wife's dressed like that, wearing a bulletproof vest and a helmet, because you're going to Kherson. And you might do this on the weekend. You might have a very young daughter, teenager, maybe a couple, and you leave your home in the relative safety. You fill up a van with antibiotics, with camouflage nets that the church have made twice as big as this whole room combined. Maybe a few extra truck tyres for the soldiers, sanitary pads for the women, Bibles, your guitar, and you go there and you distribute aid. But you can't do that in Kherson unless you dress like that. In Kherson, the Russian drones hunt people down. They'll hunt the ambulances in the daytime. They'll hunt people on bicycles. They even hunt dogs. This is Kherson. The sign says, "I love Kherson," and just below it you can see a big blast where something hit it. This is my friend Evgeny. And this is a church.
Покажемо, щоб ви розуміли,
This
як
is
це
a
все
basement church in Kherson.
практично впираєшся в голову.
See, it really is a basement.
Отак,
It's not meant to be a place where you go for worship, but it's the only safe place now. They're all basement churches. Still love Jesus, lost their men, lost their livelihoods, they lost their businesses, but they've got to get together and sing to Jesus. They've got to get together and learn about Jesus. And so they'll risk it to go into these basements and congregate. And this is him coming out of the basement. And now he's wearing the jacket. And that's what lots of pastors do. Lots of pastors do that. It's very brave. I know one of the times he went in, he said the next team went in, they didn't get to drive home in their own vehicles, they're all blown up. But none of them were hurt, so that's really good. This is what the pastor's bag looks like, a backpack, and that's John 3:16. We don't usually put John 3:16 words to the background of men defending themselves, do we? But that's a different context, isn't it? Yeah, we need to be born again. One of the things I talk about is, how can you point your gun at somebody and be trying your damnedest, trying your hardest to shoot them, and at the same time say, I love my enemy. So I talk about that. I talk about it, is it theologically necessary? Is it philosophically absurd, or is there actually a logical way to arrive at that? And have large numbers of soldiers in various wars around the world done this? In other words, have large numbers of soldiers in different armies, in different theatres of war, not used hate to fight? And the answer is yes. This is revolutionary for them, because unfortunately the Ukrainian government is encouraging hatred. So they will announce how bad the injuries were the night before, and they'll say, turn your hate into dollars, not in English. So all that hatred you got, give us more money for our army. And then they use pictures of cats, soldiers, defenders riding the backs of cats, and all the mice are the Russians. And they're dehumanising them. And this is not helpful at all, and it is not necessary. And I go there and I show them the evidence and we talk about it. It's different. This is handing out food. Yevgeny was really happy the day that they did this food drop because it's snowing. And what's the advantage of snow? The drones can't see you. So I've got a video somewhere of him playing the guitar out on the broad daylight, well not broad daylight, snowing heavily, singing out loud to the group of people standing around in the snow because they could meet outside and be safe and get their bread. And this is this case here. The reason why they were able to get their bread from the back of a van is the snow stopped the drones for a little while. And then this is the pastor's kit. There's the helmet, there's the backpack, and there's the guitar. So, very interesting, isn't it? It's like every pastor becomes a military chaplain. This church here I spoke at is the first church where I actually spoke about forgiveness. The pastor is a captain. He rarely gets time off, usually one day every 3 months. The day I was there, he was in church. He gets one day off, and he comes and he spends his Sunday with his little church. Isn't that amazing? This is what I mean. I want you to see that Jesus is alive and well, because even when people are stuck in the night, Jesus is very real to them. You know, he's not an unnecessary commodity. You know, he's not, okay, he didn't deliver, he didn't stop the war, he didn't stop my son, my brother, my uncle all being killed, or my son being wounded and losing all his fingers, but he's real. And he's worth worshipping still. So it's amazing. This church here used to have, that's their entire Sunday school group. They said before the war started there was at least 25 kids there. So it's really having a big effect on the Christian community. They've got large numbers of orphans and widows flooding through the country, and yet they're getting less men in their churches to help, and they're getting less income to help. So it's quite difficult, but they're very sacrificial. This is just some of the ordnance that's left over when the Russians backed off from somewhere. So that goes on for about half a kilometre or so, that pile. That's just from one small village. We move on. Sometimes I was keen to see, is what I read in the newspapers the same as what's on the ground? And I'd heard about this place. This is a maternity hospital. And I read in Australia that the maternity hospital on such and such street got bombed. And it showed a picture. Well, is that real? So I'm driving along in a vehicle with one of my Ukrainian friends, and guess what we see? The same maternity hospital, the same blast. Yes, it's real. They're not tricking you and making up images. It's all very, very real. And this was very clearly signposted as a maternity hospital. I guess that's maybe why they didn't turn it all the way to rubble. When the war started, when the February 2022 invasion, it's bedlam. Everybody's suddenly trying to leave the big city of Kiev with millions of people. The highways get clogged, but the Russians are pouring across the border. So you're in a traffic jam with your wife and kids, and you can't go anywhere. Whole highways jammed from left to right, as far as the eye can see. And the Russian soldiers come up walking between the cars with their machine guns, and you can see the bullet holes in the cars as they just machine gun the occupants in the cars. And then once, thankfully, the Ukrainians were able to, a month or so later, push them out of Kiev, and these are the cars that were pushed to the side of the road. So there's a lot of sad stories. Everybody's got a sad story in Ukraine. Everybody's got a sad story. It's like being in a funeral. Maybe a lot of you here have been to many funerals. At a funeral, you know, it might be your best mate, it might be your mum, crying, and then Auntie Thelma or Uncle Yuri comes along, and they tell you a funny story about your mum, and what do? You laugh. You're laughing and you're crying, you're laughing and you're crying. That's what it's like over there. Their emotions are like this. They can be, I'll talk about that later. It's really the best way to be, is to go with your emotions, control them, but you shouldn't try to stop. You should not try to be a-emotional. God made us that when we're sad we cry. He made us that when we laugh, when we are happy, we laugh, and smile. There are times for laughter, there's times for sadness, and for them this is usually happening in many times a day. So more of the cars that were all bulleted. This is a couple. So this is my first time there. I'm out of the big city. I'm crossing the Trans-Carpathian Mountains. I'm about as far west as you can go. I'm out of Kiev where the air raid alarms and things were going off so many times a day and night. And then I'm crossing here and it's green paddocks. We're a long way away and I thought, oh, peace. You know, it's been a full day driving. That morning, this photo was taken, I've been preaching in this church, the church of this couple. And I can see, oh, there's a little Orthodox church there, there's a little village there, how quaint. And then the air raid alarm comes wafting up out of the hamlet. And I was thinking, wow, you can't get away from it. There's war everywhere. And we didn't think anything of it. And we're at the peak of the mountain range, we're going back down the other side. And then Olga is in the back seat, and she's getting very frantic. She's got all the communication devices going, she's talking, they're Russian stock, so they're Russians, their native language. They love Ukraine, they realise what Russia's doing wrong, but they're ethnic Russians. And so eventually we get down to the bottom of the mountain, and he tells me that air raid alarm was because of a missile that hit the children's hospital in Kiev, the biggest children's hospital in all of Ukraine. So it was a targeted hit, it was a guided missile, someone had put in the coordinates and it got to its target. And so it's great sadness. You know, this is a daytime strike. And sorry, a bit emotional. So he says, he stops the car and he says to me, he said, John, do you really expect me? This is the first time I've been asked. He said, do you really expect me to love and forgive the people who rape our daughters and go up to children's hospitals? It's obviously rhetorical at that time. This guy's name's Sergei. And later on, as we kept on driving, it then became a time to see if you wanted to have a chat about it, and we did. And if you want to hear the rest of that story, you have to come to one of my talks about hatred and forgiveness and loving your enemies and combat killing. This is scenes from the children's hospital. Very real. Anita had friends at that hospital. Friends whose sister was working at that hospital. So she spent a lot of time trying to get her car out of the rubble. This is a camp. You might notice there's something unusual about it. They're all women and children. So it's a camp for orphans and widows. And so I think if we had a camp for orphans and widows, we wouldn't get so many people. So they're really trying their hardest to love them, to care for them. Not everyone does, but the Christian community is really shining bright. This is me teaching in the tent. Young people around. You look at people, you look at men, you say, oh, I wonder how old he is. How old are you? You with the black cap.
How old are you? 16.
16? Okay, right. So, you know, you wonder, you look around and you think, okay, that guy looks like he's 24. Wonder where he's going to be next year. Of course, they draft them at 25. Anywhere between the age of 25 and 55, they'll take you off the street. And all the way up to 60 if they think you can be officer material. So, very lively group. They're just like you. They want fun, they want water fights, they play silly games. So there's still all that normality. People are still getting married. Some people still choosing to have children. Obviously there are people still commuting to work. It's this constant reminders, okay, it looks normal, but it's not. This guy here really exemplifies why we first went there. So that guy's absolutely out to it. It's about, I think, at least 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He still hasn't sobered up. He had a bender the night before, probably a mix of alcohol and drugs. And he's so out to it that I went up to him. I'm really curious. And I watched the flies walk up his nose. And he didn't flinch. I thought, wow, man, you were really out to it. So our friends that we first talked to, who were promoting my book in Ukraine, they rang us up once and they said, oh, we think you should come here and help. And what's that? And they said, well, we're starting up a rehabilitation centre. Of course, they heard my wife does rehabilitation. So they thought, oh, rehabilitation of drug addicts. They're never connected. And my wife's thinking, oh, because she didn't want to go. So she's thinking, oh, gee, you know, what do I do? Someone invited me. And then when she found out they do alcohol and drug, she said, inside she went, whew, you don't have to go. John, you go by yourself. They want you, but they don't need me. So she said, no, you've got your wires crossed. I don't do that sort of rehab. And then the man we were talking to, the young pastor, he said, well, it just so happens that I discipled the current president of the Christian Medical Association of Ukraine. He would love to talk to you. And that's how Anita ended up being invited to teach in all these different hospitals. So yeah, alcohol and drugs are a big problem, especially with the war. This is the alcohol and drug centre on the inside, so they just rented a big house. The guy in the white t-shirt in the corner sitting back, Andre, he's got the most deformed sort of walk you'll ever see. He's quite twisted in his torso. He's got a terrible disease. We do have it in Australia, but we treat it pretty well. But he got into the wrong side of the world. At a young age, he became a male prostitute. And now he's just brimming over with love for Jesus. He sings, he goes to the camps, tries to get around. He's at this place because they know that you need 18 months of being dry before it's safe for you to be out on your own. But this guy loves Jesus. You know, he's in pain every day because of this disease. He walks around like very warped and twisted. I was a physio for 33 years. Never saw anybody walk from A to B and still be upright, you know. And so these are people who Jesus is so real to them despite it being so bleak. And if you don't remember anything else apart from tonight, realise that's how powerful Jesus is. Oh, that's my book in Ukrainian. And that's basically the gist of a lot of my talk. I don't think I left anything out particular. Yeah, we might park it somewhere. That will do. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I've inspired you to yourselves love Jesus. People say, John, why did you go? A lot of people tell us that God will protect you. He will put his hand over you. Well, we don't actually believe that. If it's God's will, he will. But seeing he let so many of them get bombed and wounded and maimed, what right have we got to think that we should be specially treated compared to them? God promises that he'll stay with us no matter what, and we can walk with him no matter what. Whether you get a disease tomorrow or paralysed tomorrow, God will be with you. He doesn't promise us health and wealth here in Australia. He doesn't promise you that when you go into a war-torn country. But we do know this, that we love him. He's everything to us. He wants us there. People tell us that we're useful. That's really useful to know that you actually are useful. There's a verse I guess I'll leave with you. He who loves little, he who is forgiven little, loves little. He who is forgiven a lot, loves a lot. I certainly feel the enormity of how much I've been forgiven. And so I just regard it as a wonderful privilege to show my love. And that's what it's all about. Yeah. Thank you.